In the spring of 1994, a man in the number 10 shirt stood silently on the Parc des Princes pitch. The crowd roared, yet he said nothing. He never needed to. He was a Brazilian in Paris. Not just any Brazilian, but the captain, a quiet revolutionary in a foreign land. His name? Rai. He wasn't the loudest voice in the locker room. He didn't crave the cameras or chase the chaos of stardom. But he led a forgotten PSG to glory, lifting the Ligue 1 trophy when no one believed they could. And then, as silently as he came, he faded, disappearing from the conversation when Paris became the playground of Galacticos. Some say it was the system. Others say it was his nature, too poetic for a game that had become too brutal. But here's the forgotten crack in PSG's history. Before the oil, before the billions, before Neymar and Mbappé, there was a captain who brought beauty, brains, and brotherhood to Paris. He wasn't just the man with the armband. He was the soul of a city club that dared to dream. And yet, Paris has forgotten him. Why did this happen? Why did a World Cup winning Brazilian, the younger brother of Sócrates, the football philosopher, vanish from the legacy he helped build? This isn't just a story about a footballer. It's a story about silence, about legacy, about how even the most elegant revolutions can be erased by time. Because Rai didn't fall from grace. He walked away from it. Rai Souza Vieira de Oliveira was born in Ribeirão Preto, Brazil, in 1965, 2 decades before Paris Saint-Germain would even begin to dream of world domination. But he was born into more than just a footballing nation. He was born into a legacy. His older brother was Sócrates, the doctor, the thinker, the captain of Brazil's 1982 World Cup team, and the face of the Corinthians democracy movement. Sócrates was political, philosophical, radical. Rai, by contrast, was quiet, composed, and introspective. If Sócrates was revolution with a megaphone, Rai was poetry whispered in the rain. Growing up in the shadow of such a giant could have drowned him, but Rai carved his own path, one of balance and grace. While Sócrates would retire early and remain a national icon, Rai's trajectory would lead him across the Atlantic to a city not known for forgiving silence. By the early 1990s, Brazilian football was at a crossroads. The flamboyance of the 80s had waned under the pressure of modern tactics and European pragmatism. The national team was desperate for redemption, and a new generation was forming, one that would win the World Cup in 1994, but without the same lyrical beauty of the past. In that in-between space, Rai emerged, elegant but effective, stylish but structured, a bridge between eras. He first flourished at São Paulo FC under the management of Tele Santana, the same man who had coached his brother at the 1982 World Cup. Tele's idealistic football mirrored Rai's sensibilities. With São Paulo, Rai conquered South America, winning the Copa Libertadores and the Intercontinental Cup, defeating mighty Barcelona in 1992. He wasn't just good, he was majestic, a playmaker with the body of a midfielder and the brain of a conductor. His move to Paris Saint-Germain in 1993 was not just a transfer, it was a cultural collision. At the time, PSG was not the global giant it claims to be today. The club was relatively young and underfunded, its ambitions still forming. But that season, PSG dared to reach higher, signing the Brazilian maestro to orchestrate their dreams. And Rai delivered. In a league known for its physicality, Rai brought finesse. His touch was velvet, his vision clairvoyant. He wasn't just PSG's number 10. He was their conductor, their poet in cleats. Under his leadership, PSG won the Ligue 1 title in 1994, only the second in their history at the time, and reached the UEFA Champions League semifinals in 1995, defeating titans like Bayern Munich along the way. But here's where the shadow begins to form. Despite his genius, Rai's soft-spoken leadership style never matched the archetype of European football stardom. He didn't shout, he didn't pose, he didn't sell drama. Paris loved brilliance, but only when it screamed. Rai whispered. And in the cacophony of football politics and business, a whisper doesn't last long. Then came the World Cup. In 1994, Rai was named captain of Brazil's national team, an honor that should have cemented his legacy forever. But after a disappointing group stage, coach Carlos Alberto Pereira made a bold move. He benched Rai. Dunga, the polar opposite in style and temperament, took over the armband. Brazil went on to win the tournament, but Rai's role was diminished, relegated to memory's margins. It was a symbolic moment. The torch wasn't just passed, it was snuffed out. Back in Paris, Rai continued to shine, but something had shifted. He was never the same in the public eye. And as PSG evolved, his name was gradually faded out of its narrative. By the late 90s, as he returned to São Paulo to end his career, the world had already begun to forget him. But why? Why was the man who led PSG to its first great European run, a World Cup winning captain, a symbol of grace in an era of grit, so casually erased from football's grand tapestry? What happened behind the curtains? In the next section, we'll dive into the rise and fall. The turning point, the moments that redefined Rai's career, not just in results, but in perception. When Rai arrived in Paris in 1993, he did so with little fanfare. The French press was skeptical. Yet another Brazilian arriving with flair, but no guarantee of function. But they didn't understand what they were witnessing. Rai wasn't a showman, he was a craftsman. In his first season at PSG, he slowly earned the respect of teammates, coaches, and eventually the fans. He wasn't the fastest, nor the most physical. But his intelligence on the ball, his elegant first touch, his composure under pressure, these made him indispensable. And when he scored, he did so with purpose. No acrobatics, no arrogance, just execution. By 1994, Rai had become the undisputed leader of a PSG side that was beginning to believe in itself. That year, they stormed to the Ligue 1 title, the club's first in nearly a decade. Paris, long overshadowed by the giants of Marseille and Lyon, now had its own conductor, and he wore the armband with grace. The peak came in 1995 in the UEFA Champions League. PSG stunned Europe, defeating Johan Cruyff's Barcelona and toppling Bayern Munich in a quarter-final showdown that would become the stuff of legend. Rai, orchestrating attacks with measured calm, seemed to float above the field. He wasn't just playing, he was composing. But somewhere in the applause, a fracture was forming. Rai's quiet demeanor, once seen as refreshing, was now being reinterpreted as distance. The French media began to question his leadership style. In a country where captains were often warriors, Rai seemed too gentle. That perception wasn't helped by what happened that same year across the Atlantic. The 1994 World Cup in the United States was supposed to be Rai's moment. Named captain of the Seleção, he carried the burden of expectation from a footballing nation still haunted by its failures of 1982 and 1986. But Brazil's opening matches were shaky. Rai scored a crucial penalty, but his performances lacked the flamboyance fans demanded. After 3 group games, Coach Pereira made a seismic decision. He dropped his captain. In came Dunga. Hard, vocal, combative. The team changed shape. The mood changed too. Brazil, suddenly more pragmatic and less poetic, marched all the way to the final and won. Rai lifted the trophy, but not as captain, not as hero. He had been, essentially, phased out of his own triumph. It was a wound he never quite talked about, but it showed. Back in Paris, something in Rai shifted. He continued to play well, but the sparkle dimmed. He captained PSG to domestic cup wins in 1995 and 1998, but the team's continental momentum had waned. The new management brought in flashier, more marketable stars. The club's philosophy drifted. Rai no longer fit the model of the future, and the fans, seduced by fresh names and louder personalities, slowly turned their gaze away. In 1998, Rai made the decision to return home, to São Paulo, where it had all started. There was no farewell tour in Paris, no teary testimonial match, just a quiet goodbye, the kind only Rai could give. His decline wasn't dramatic. There was no scandal, no injury, no fall from grace. It was subtler than that, more painful in a way. It was as if the game moved on without him, and no one stopped to ask why. By the time PSG entered its oil-rich era and began rewriting its history with megastars and marketing campaigns, Rai's name had all but vanished. He wasn't on the murals, he wasn't in the documentaries. The captain who brought them European respect was now a footnote. But perhaps that's the tragedy. Rai didn't fall, he was erased, not by failure, but by indifference. What lay beneath that quiet goodbye? What did Rai really feel after being benched at the World Cup, after being overlooked at PSG, after watching the game grow louder while he stood still? That's what we'll explore next, in the darkness behind the beauty. There's a particular kind of pain that doesn't scream. It doesn't explode. It lingers, quiet, unresolved, dignified. That was Rai's burden. After the 1994 World Cup, the tournament he was supposed to command, he returned to PSG with a trophy in hand, but a scar on the soul. The press rarely asked what it felt like to be stripped of the captaincy mid-tournament, to see your boyhood dream realized from the sidelines. The cameras focused on Romario's brilliance, Bebeto's celebrations, Dunga's defiance. Rai? He was just there, smiling politely, applauding his teammates, hiding the sting. In private, close friends later admitted, Rai struggled with that benching more than he ever let on. It wasn't just a tactical decision. It was a message that the world perhaps didn't value his kind of leadership anymore. At PSG, the cracks widened. The club was shifting. Money was becoming louder than merit. Directors pushed for players who looked good on billboards. Rai, soft-spoken and socially conscious, was an anomaly. While other stars chased endorsements, Rai supported charities. While others lived for the spotlight, he supported educational reform in Brazil. He was never quite marketable, not in the way brands wanted. He was playing the best football of his life, yet he often seemed like a man out of time. In interviews, Rai rarely complained, but between the lines, you could hear it, the disillusionment. He once said, "Football has to be about joy and meaning. When it loses those things, it loses me." That was no throwaway line. That was confession. He had always played with purpose, not just to win, but to inspire, to live up to the ideals instilled by his brother Sócrates, who had used football as a platform for resistance, education, and freedom. Rai believed in that legacy. But as football became commercialized, he watched those values erode, slowly, painfully. There's an infamous rumor, never confirmed, that when PSG executives began discussing a major branding overhaul in 1997, Rai's name was left off the Future Legends roster. A staffer reportedly asked why. The executive allegedly replied, "Rai doesn't sell." Whether true or not, it captured the shift. By the time Rai decided to leave Harris in 1998, it wasn't because he was finished. He could have stayed. He still had offers, but he chose silence. He chose dignity. He chose to return to São Paulo to play one last season for the club that had never forgotten him. And still, the shadows followed. Even in retirement, Rai battled with what he called the narrative vacuum, the silence around his name in European circles, the erasure of nuance in football memory, where only the loudest survive. But Rai didn't fade into bitterness. He turned inward and upward. He became an activist, a philanthropist, a board member of NGOs focused on education and democracy. He helped build Gol de Letra, an award-winning foundation for at-risk youth in Brazil. He fought for literacy, for dignity, for the very values his brother had once defended with a captain's armband. And yet, the football world rarely noticed. No documentaries, no statue, no roaring chant of his name in the Parc des Princes, just silence. In 2014, when PSG celebrated its storied history, fans noted a painful omission. Rai's name was barely mentioned. His image? Absent. It took pressure from older ultras and a few nostalgic journalists to get the club to finally invite him back in 2016 for a tribute night. When he walked out onto the pitch, the applause was respectful, but not roaring. Most of the new generation didn't know him. He smiled, he waved, he didn't look bitter. But one couldn't help wondering, did he deserve more than this? In that moment, it wasn't just Rai who had been forgotten. It was an entire philosophy of the game, one where elegance, humility, and quiet leadership still had a place, where football was art, not algorithm. Rai's darkness wasn't scandal. It wasn't addiction. It was erasure. The kind of erasure that happens when history favors the loud. And in a world obsessed with noise, Rai was a symphony lost to silence. It's easy to remember the loud ones, the ones who scream into cameras, who sell shirts by the truckload, who become memes, brands, hashtags. Modern football adores its icons with flair and volume, but it often forgets the ones who whisper, even when they were the ones who carried the team. Rai was one of those forgotten leaders. Watching his story unfold, we're left with a haunting question. Was Rai a wasted genius, or simply a man too refined for the modern game? And perhaps more importantly, did football change, or did we? He had all the ingredients of a legend, the trophies, the talent, the torch of his brother's legacy. He lifted PSG to their first golden age. He captained Brazil at a World Cup. He played football the way an architect sketches a building, with clarity, vision, and grace. And yet, he disappeared from the frame. Why? Was it because he wasn't marketable enough? Because he didn't play the media's game? Because his idea of leadership didn't involve shouting or pointing fingers? Rai's tragedy isn't that he fell, it's that he stayed true, in a world that was no longer built for people like him. Football today rewards extremes. It rewards controversy, spectacle, narratives that can be clipped into 15-second reels. Rai, he belonged to another frequency, slower, richer, deeper. His silence wasn't emptiness, it was substance. And maybe that's why so few understood him. But then we must ask ourselves, is it our fault he was forgotten? The fans, the media, the clubs, did we stop honoring grace when it no longer entertained us? Did we trade poetry for volume? When PSG paints its new pantheon with the likes of Neymar, Mbappe, and Messi, does it even remember who helped lay the foundation? Or has the flood of oil money washed away the club's soul? Rai's story challenges us to rethink how we define greatness. It urges us to look beyond highlight reels and tabloid headlines. To ask, what do we lose when we forget the quiet captains? Because Rai wasn't just a player. He was an idea that football could still be beautiful, dignified, and wise. That victory didn't always have to be loud. And maybe, just maybe, that's why he still matters. Not despite the silence, but because of it. Today, when the Parc des Princes roars for its modern idols, when the lights blind, the fireworks burst, and names like Mbappe echo through the night, somewhere, the ghost of another captain walks quietly in the background. Rai is not gone. He's just not spoken about. But if you dig beneath the gloss, beneath the billion-euro transfers and the glittering Instagram feeds, you'll find his fingerprints. On every PSG jersey that aspires to dignity. On every young fan who believes football can still be beautiful, even when it's quiet. On every memory of a club that once had heart before it had hype. In Brazil, he is remembered differently. São Paulo fans still chant his name, still call him O Maestro. In the alleyways where football is still sacred, Rai lives on. Not as a forgotten star, but as a symbol of how the game should be played. More than that, Rai built beyond football. Through his Gol de Letra Foundation, he changed real lives, offering education and hope where before there was none. While others built brands, he built futures. While others sold shoes, he bought books. In a way, he didn't leave the game. He elevated it. And perhaps that's the legacy he always wanted. Not the statue, not the headlines, but the quiet knowledge that he gave the game more than he took. Rai reminds us that not every hero wears his heart on his sleeve. Some carry it silently, with grace, with poetry, with purpose. So the next time you see a PSG banner celebrating greatness, ask yourself, where is Rai? And if no one answers, remember this. Some stories weren't meant to be screamed. Some legends don't shine under floodlights. Some captains, the truest ones, lead with silence and leave with grace. And maybe, just maybe, Paris didn't deserve him after all.